So yeah, good afternoon once again. Um, yeah, good afternoon, Empress Wendy. Thank you very much for being here. Lovely to be here. Just want to be sure that we have our folks on YouTube and Facebook online. I think Twitter is good now. Just give me a couple of seconds to get this thing sorted. Glad to be again. Everybody's fine. So something quite interesting. Normally, today's Tuesday, so we don't have a full session. We don't really do news on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but it's important to mention. I mean, I've known about some of these things for a bit, but I wanted to have full information. So hopefully we can talk about it tomorrow. And we're also hoping that the government will do the right thing in that area. Of course, from the reports I've gotten beyond the news, sometimes you try to get to the root of the matter before you speak on it. And apparently it seems that the crisis has something to do with mineral resources in that part of the country. And I'm hoping that with these conversations that we're having, and also with the work that the government, report to be doing, they said they're doing some things. So we're hoping that, we're going to have lasting solution in that part of Nigeria, which is interestingly Yoruba part of Kwara State. The sad part for me is just that Amotekun cannot operate in that area because Amotekun is meant for the southwestern part of Nigeria. And so although we have our brothers in North Central, we can't really do anything about it because of geopolitical zones, the politics in that regard. We're going to talk more about this tomorrow. I just thought I should mention it, even though we will not be discussing the news today, being Tuesday. Well, thank you very much for being here. It's a lovely Tuesday afternoon. Hope you're having a great time. Please, if you're on TikTok, thank you, by the way, thank you first for liking the live. We are on 3.4k likes now on TikTok, which is pretty good. But we have to keep at it. It's not going to be for a very long time, but we have to make sure that we're able to attract other people from the FIP and also ensure we don't, lose the lives. So please power tap and share. If you're here on TikTok, for those on YouTube, please just double tap on your screen, like the live, and also share the live. Same goes for Facebook and Twitter. So blessed to be here today. Today we shall be looking at a session we had a while back, and we're talking about the concept of Oduduwa. Sometimes people ask questions. Of course, there's a lot of should I call it history? Pseudo history, I should say, about Yoruba people and our history and our kings and stuff like that. So it's important for us to be educated. Also, yesterday somebody came up, we were talking about Nigerian politics, and someone asked a question: how come our parents didn't teach us these things? And I remember saying that it's important for us, it's okay to acknowledge the fault of our parents, but it's important for us to do better to ensure that we, teach our children. However, as far as identity is concerned, you don't want to start with the war or with First Republic politics or with the coup or any of those things, or even with Nigeria's independence or colonization. That's not where our history begins. And it's a very, very important thing, because if you start your history there, most likely you're going to abhor, so you're going to, not abhor, you won't abhor hatred. You're going to become, let me put it this way, there's a great likelihood that are going to become hateful towards different groups of people in Nigeria or even abroad. Because if your history begins with colonization, it's as though you had nothing before the British arrived. If your history begins with Nigerian politics, it's as though you have nothing to look forward to or nothing to even look back on apart from the intrigues of that era. If your history begins with a war, then all you think about is, you know, bombs and artillery and, you know, propaganda and narratives. So it's important for us to start where we should start from. And for me as a Yoruba person, the best place to start is with Yoruba identity, to know exactly who we are and how far we've come and why we're the way we are. And some things are also in our history, in our identity, in who we are. These things help us to be grounded, right? So by the time you begin to study world history, church history, political history, Nigerian history, whatever it is you're studying, your identity is already rooted, it's established. And so you're not bothered by, you know, oh, this is what some people did, that's what some people did. And so if you're going to do better, and this is why I always tell people that it's important for you not to, it's important for us not to dwell in, you know, this place where we're always looking at what folks who went ahead of us should have done. Oh, they should have done this. Oh, they should have done that. If they had done this, I would have known. Well, you can't really blame them now, can you? Because we're adults now, so we can decide what we want to learn and also how we want to do better by passing certain things along to our children. And I remember saying yesterday that even if you were not taught about the war by your parents and your Yoruba, one of the good things you have is that you were not taught to hate any other group. You were not taught that you are the victim of any other person. Therefore, it is better for you to have kindness, or what you even call naivety, than to have ignorance or to have hate. Ignorance in this particular scenario is much preferred to hatred. All right, so you want to prefer, you prefer to be ignorant of it than to hate. However, you cannot stay ignorant. We have to educate ourselves. But like I said, we want to go back in time to discuss our history as a people. Now, one of those things that people have asked several times is about Oduduwa and how it came to be, the idea of Ife, why it's so important. Now, this is not a full session, so we're going to have, at some point, we're going to have a series to discuss the primacy of Ife, what Ife is to us, the greatness of Ife, the greatness of Oyo, the greatness of Ibadan, the greatness of Ekiti, of Ijebu, of the Awori, of different Yoruba groups. So we're going to get into all of those things. But I just felt that since as Yoruba people, we all have a common ancestor in terms of the progenitor of our race, it's important to actually have a conversation around him. So today, we'll be looking at Oduduwa as a person. Now, it's possible that we have questions and answers afterwards. That would be peachy. But for now, I'm just going to read the description. We're going to be playing from a, one second. I'll be playing a video, right, on YouTube. That's where we're starting. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. No problems at all. All right. Before we get into this, please, if you're on TikTok, again, thank you for being here. You know, we do this together every time. So I would ask that you please power tap. It's very, very important. For those of us on YouTube, thank you very much for joining. Kindly double tap your screen. That way you have liked the live. Okay, just, I mean, depending on the device you're using though, but if double tapping doesn't work for you, please just, the important thing is to like the live. Okay, thank you. And this is important because, you know, once we start, we're going to be able to stop to tell us to do all these things. And I know a lot of us are working and you're busy, but just let's assume that we are doing this together because we are. So please just use one finger to tap on your screen. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, G Viral. Good to see you. Otojo Meta, Bobolinko, Shala Neil. Okay. So this stuff is a two-part series. Okay. And you're going to have a great time. That's much I am sure of. Okay, so I'm going to read the description and then get right into it. So let's get into it now. People love to ask, were there kings in Yoruba land before Oduduwa? If there were, why does our history start with him? How can he be our father if he wasn't the first man or first king? The questions sound deep until you think clearly. The answers aren't as complicated as they seem. No, the answers aren't complicated at all. They only shake people who haven't bothered to reflect. Here's the short answer. Oduduwa marks a turning point, a new era. He's the beginning of existence because he's the beginning of a powerful legacy. Think of how the world divides into BC and AD. That's how Yoruba history views Oduduwa. And the long answer will break it all down in this two-part video. So take a listen to this. This is on the YouTube channel, Busri Oris. It's titled, Was Oduduwa the first king in Yoruba land? I just think it's about for us to do this again today. So take a listen, enjoy, part up as you listen. God bless. Right, the topography of Ife.
Hello, sir.
All right, welcome.
Yeah, I'm audible enough.
Yeah, you are. You are.
Okay. A question. So yesterday, during the conversation, we were discussing about Oduduwa and him being the father of Yorubas.
All right. So I was asking if you were able to, if you heard any part of the video itself when it started playing. Shengbo abi sheka shegbo kolo di poko ipe egbomo abi pe egbara. I just wanted to confirm. So can you hear this?
So he asked questions about, are there kings in Yoruba land before Oduduwa was born?
All right. So did you hear somebody asking the question if there were kings in Yoruba land before Oduduwa? Shegbo. If you're good, then it's fine. Then okay, you can hear. Perfect. All right. So let's start again. Let's start all over again.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
All right. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm audible enough.
Yeah, you are. You are.
Okay. A question. So yesterday, during the conversation, we were discussing about Oduduwa and him being the father of Yorubas. So he asked questions about, are there kings in Yoruba land before Oduduwa was born?
Should I begin to answer it straight like this? Can you just ask?
No,
as you're asking.
I'm going back
down
to,
there.
I'm,
Okay,
no, I'm going back to work, so let me just work.
Nisuru. Okay. Were there kings in Yoruba before Oduduwa? Were there kings in Yoruba land?
Yeah. Well, before Oduduwa was born, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if yes, how come? If yes, how come our what's it called? Our history starts from Oduduwa? Because I think most of the Yorubas agree that most of the Yorubas on that platform agree that there were kings in maybe in Ijebu or Ugbo, Olugbo of Ugbo or some name.
There was nothing like
I'm very sure they didn't get.
There was nothing like Olugbo, well. There was nothing like Olugbo, but please continue. Mongbo.
So
is that all?
Also, he went further than that. No, that's not all. That's not all.
Okay.
So he also said that Oduduwa, according to Samuel Ajayi Crowther and Samuel Johnson that they wrote that Oduduwa came from Sudan.
Neither of them actually wrote.
Samuel Johnson.
Neither of them said anything about Sudan in connection with Oduduwa. What's it going moral?
Then lastly,
I'm going to bring out a book.
Oduduwa was a Odudu. Okay. So and lastly said Oduduwa was a conqueror. He was conquering all the Yoruba kings, forcing them to be their own, forcing them for him to be their own lord or something like that. Not something like that. So that was what they were discussing throughout the study.
Okay. All right, I'm going to mute you now. Okay, thank you. Sudan, Colibian. Let me see. So I'm thinking what book I should go. Should I go up, stand up now? I think we just continue. I think if I have to stand up and pick up any book, I think I have a couple of books here. But if I have to stand up at any point, I will let you know. So where do we even begin? All right, Mumbo. Much later. So I think the best way to understand that question is to understand the space where Oduduwa became king. Let's start with let's try and understand what Ife itself was like. Were there kings in Yoruba land? Was there a king? No. All right. Now to get to this, we also first have to understand what Ife looked like back then. You see, Ife has this interesting, it still does have this interesting topography. It's like, and this is what scholars, would say whenever, especially archaeologists, whenever they describe the topography of Ife, it's like a bowl, right? There's a depression, and then you have a rim, and then you have the hills. Now, inside that depression, there is a swamp, which of course archaeologists, posit that it's like it shows a sign that there used to be a body of water in that particular place, but it dried out over time. Now, but while it was still Guinea, there was a swamp, all right, and it was populated by a particular group of people. Those group of people that are in that particular area are called the Igbo or Ugbo. That part of the places where they were. They were fishermen, they were foragers. Now, on the rim, you have communities. Those communities in Ife at the time, they were called Elu. In our songs in Ife today, you hear, if for instance you know Drojayaremo, you Kwadamo, you hear Ife Mefa, Elu Meje, talks to the 13 communities that were called the Elu at the time, or Elu. Those 13 communities were in that rim. All right, so you have like a depression. Inside there, you have a swamp. Around that place, people are living there. That place is called the Ugbo. The Igbo people live in that space. You come to the rim, and then you have the 13 communities. There's Omologun, Parakin, Okeoja, Iloran, Odin, Ideta, Iloromu, Iwerin, Okeawo, Ijugbe, Iraye, Imojubi, and Ido. Those 13 communities had kings. Whenever you hear in Nigeria of autonomous communities, have you heard that thing before? I want to make sure that we are together. Have you heard the phrase autonomous communities? Has anybody heard of that word before? You heard it's very popular in a particular part of Nigeria, autonomous communities. You heard it before? Okay, you heard it before. Okay. So all those 13 communities were autonomous, right? There was nobody ruling everybody. Each group had its own king, all right? And for instance, Ijugbe had a king called Obalejugbe. interesting, when I was younger, I had an uncle who used to stay at Ijube. And so we'll go there, and I was very small. We'll go there and greet him, but that name just stuck. Each of them also had different deities. It was so interesting that Ijube had the biggest yams in Ife at the time. I'm talking BC. Had the biggest yams. You know, people now decided, for some interesting reason, to adopt their deity. Later, it's possibly, and this is what archaeologists have also said, it's possible it's because of the soil quality and stuff, but it had better produce as far as yams were concerned. Now, each of them had their kings, each of them had their deities, and they were different, but they were all in the same place. This is what I always tell people about this idea of religion in Yoruba land. We never really had just one deity for a place and say, oh, we have one religion. Yoruba has always had multiplicity of deities. It's in our history, and it's not, I'm talking about the 100, 500, 1,000 years. I'm talking from Igbalai. Whatever you know as the spirituality that we have today, it is dated. But I may not talk about it. But let's just get back into this. So 13 communities, everyone had their own kings, they had their own deities, they had a way of doing things. But at a particular point in history, they came together and said, you know what? You have your own kingdom. You are a king there. You are a king there. But we need to take advantage of the resources around us. So why not have this thing where the 13 of us can come together, and then we can appoint a person to lead us. Now, not the 13 communities, the 13 kings. So the communities remained autonomous, but the kings now had a sort of confederacy, and the leadership of that confederacy will be rotational. So think of it like a confederacy where each unit still retains autonomy, but when it comes to certain things that involves all of us, we can work together based on the person who is the chairman at the time. The chairman is not the king of Ife. He is the head of the kings. Whenever they are, and he has a term. His term basically is until he dies, actually. He's always the eldest. The oldest amongst them will be the king. Right? So the oldest person will be the head, not the king, will be the head of those kings. In our history, the first person who turned out to be the first chairman of the confederacy was the man called Oramfe. Of course, his deity now is worshipped now and is venerated. Oramfe Olena, who is also a deity today in Ife. Oramfe was the very first. There is a song, Toman Konfe, Ora Lonife. Wait, don't let me sing everything. The point is, what I want to bring out was just Ora Lonife, Ora Loloki, Ora Lonile. The idea is that he is now the one that everybody has to submit to, or at least the kings have to submit to. Not that he was the king of the town, but he was the head of the kings. And so every time the head Tobati Waja, the next oldest person will become the head. And that went on for many, many years. Now, Oramfe himself is from a part of Ife called Okiora. So I mentioned earlier that there's a depression in the bowl where you have the Igbo people. There's a rim where you have the 13 settlements. Then there is the hills. There are 7 hills surrounding Ife. One of those hills is called Okiora. Interestingly, Oduduwa is also from that hill. It's eastward of the main bowl, of the main side of Ife, but it's in Ife, right? So think of it like city center, but you still have the city. So you have the depression, you have the rim, and then you have the hills. Oramfe was from Okiora, just like Oduduwa, much later. Again, not the same timeline, many centuries apart. Okay? So Oramfe became the first head of all the kings, and then they had many, many, leaders and elders and chairmen, that's the word, chairman of the confederacy. The very last chairman was Obatala. At the time, he was a king of Ideta. He was not the king of Ife. There was no king of Ife. And I've heard one person say, like, his father's father used to be the king of Ife before Oduduwa. Is a lie. There was never any king of Ife. Yoruba had not developed the idea of uniting communities and building a capital like Oduduwa did. He was the first, which is why we call him our father. But I'll get to that later. Now you had all these, kings, but each community can determine who will be their king because it's their right, it's their own space, and everybody knows their boundaries, but we can work together. That's why I said this idea of unity, we've practiced it for a very long time in Yoruba land. Now, by the time of Obatala, there were certain things going on in Ife. We may not get into it today. Certain things going on today in Ife at the time. Certain people had some issues with the way leadership was at the time. They found some they were disillusioned with the kind of leadership that they had at the time. There were some frailties from the leader at the time. There are certain things that were not just very cool. Some, of course, were still loyal to him. Some wanted a change. Not from Sudan. By the way, excuse me, people lie a lot. Ajayi Crowther did not write about Oduduwa's history. The person who wrote Yoruba history and mentioned Oduduwa is Samuel Johnson, and he published his book in 1921. That book is inside, but I can't stand up to go and read it now. A History of the Yoruba People. It was published in 1921. Not once was Sudan even brought up. What was brought up was not even his own theory. The idea of an Arabic origin and stuff like that was not even from him as a person. It was from another. It was quoting someone else. Who was he quoting? He was quoting Sultan Bello, Ahmadu Bello's grandfather, a direct descendant of Usman Dan Fodio, who was in his own mind writing stuff about where he thinks Yoruba people must have come from. But again, we'll get to that later. That's not the exact answer to the question you're asking. If we have to, I will get into what Sultan Bello actually said and what Samuel Johnson wrote. Right? And by the way, I think people assume that if two people have Samuel in their names, then that means that both of them wrote the same books. So that's to tell you the kind of people that are talking all these things. So Samuel Johnson wrote that. By the way, Samuel Johnson himself is from Oyo. He's a Yoruba man. So he took that name, of course, because he had returned from Sierra Leone, and that was where he got his name. Okay. Now, where was I? Obatala was the one leading at the time. People were already clamoring for change. Oduduwa gets in the mix, not from abroad. He's from that place. And by the way, as I'm talking, I've already mentioned one book. By the way, that book is very good, apart from the bits that have to do with history, because the problem with that book, as far as origins of Yoruba is concerned, is that it's everywhere, and so it's difficult to pin it down. But it's still a very, very important book. Once you move past that particular, thing, if you ever want to review the book, I will explain in details. But you can still read the book by Stephen Banji Akitoye, A History of the Yoruba, and also a book by Akinwumi Ogundiran, Yoruba, The New History. You can also read Cradle of a Race by Adema Kinwa. Then there's another book on Ife by Akin Jogbe. Anyway, around that time, people were already clamoring for change. Part of these people there, but of course not a king. I mean, at least not one of the 13 heads. Was known to be something, even in Okiora. And Okiora is not a recent creation. It was the same place where Oramfe came from. Okay? He comes around and says, we've got to change this whole structure. This is not helping. There are some details I will not get into right now. Like this is not helping. There's times change, right? And then as times change, sometimes it might require a change in political structure. And so what he said was that instead of having 13 settlements with kings, they could band everybody together. Anyway, his own ideas led to a fight. Was there a war between Oduduwa and Obatala? Some Yoruba will say no, because they don't want to sound like Oduduwa fought. There was a war, and it was not Bang, bang, bang. Okay, at Parija. No, it was physical. There were weapons involved. There were sackings involved. Some of the heads of those 13 communities were on the side of Oduduwa. Some were on the side of Obatala. And eventually, they were able to push Obatala out. Obatala was not the leader of Ife. He was the leader of the kings of the 13 settlements. His own settlement was called Ideta. When the war became fierce, he was pushed out of Ideta and he established a place called Ideta Oko, which tells you that Ideta Ile, apparently. Some people call it Ideta, some people call it Idita. It's the same thing. If sometimes we have different ways of saying the same thing. While he was there was a prince called Prince Ojumu. He brokered peace. By the way, before that, there was a problem in Ideta Oko. There was a smallpox epidemic, right? Affected a lot of people. So they had to broker peace. When they brokered, Prince Ojumu got in the mix, they brokered peace. And they had to come with a new way of, okay, so these people, if you ban all the settlements of Ife, as a matter of fact, that's exactly how Oduduwa became the king of Ife. He banded the 13 communities together and became the king of everyone. That had not happened before anywhere in Yoruba land before him. Of autonomous communities, not so big. What Oduduwa did in the 11th century is the exact same thing you see all across Yoruba land. Whether you go to Ondo, you go to Ijebu, you go to Oyo, you go to even Egba, with a little twist, Egba, is the same structure you find everywhere. It was not the first king, but it was the first king that will be known as a divine king. So you see, everybody on earth becomes, before him, you become a deity after you are gone. For the Oni, he is not going to have to waja to become an Orisha. He is divine from the very word go. That's why it's called Oni Risha. For instance, even the first class, the big kings in Yoruba land are known as Alashe Ekeji Orisha. Oni is not Alashe Ekeji Orisha. Oni is Oni Risha. He is a deity. Okay? That concept of divine kingship did not exist in Yoruba land until that moment. Also, the idea of banding different communities together did not happen before that moment. The fact that he was able to do something that we had never seen before made it, so you know how you have BC and AD, before Christ and in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini. It's not like there was no word before Jesus was born, but his life was so important, that was so significant, that it marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. When we call Oduduwa our father, it's not like, oh, there was no other, and I'm going to go to the spiritual aspect. I know there's a spiritual aspect of creation with Oduduwa and everything. That's not what we're talking about now. So there's the myth, there's the history. What I'm talking to you right now is the history. The myth is also valid, but the myth explains something totally different. But that's not where we're going right now. So if you have that thing, oh, how about they said that Oduduwa was the first person that came to the earth? That's the myth of our origin. That's different from the history. And if we have to get to it, we'll get to it. Now, the point is that because he was so significant and his influence, you can't even say was, he's such a significant figure in our history. When we want to discuss our history, we say things that happened before him and after him, just like we will say before Christ and after Christ. For example, if I have to ask you, let me ask you a question right now. Who is the father of modern Yoruba people? I'm not giving you multiple choice or anything. If you just write whatever answer you think. Who is the father of modern Yoruba people? Awo. People are writing Awo. Are you sure? Really? Awo, Awo, Awo. So the question is this: was Awo why was Awo the first Yoruba man? The idea of Awolowo being our father today is not a biological fact. It's a historical and ideological fact. It's not about did he give birth to all of us? No, we are here because he came. If you are discussing the history of Yoruba land today, I'm not saying he was even the wisest that ever lived. That's not the point. The point is that he's so significant that as far as Yoruba history is concerned, in the last 100, 150 years, you impact was is so significant that we still feel him. And I remember I say it every time. If we were living in the 14th or 15th century, there would be a shrine to Awo today. But of course, we don't have any shrine to him, but we can call him father, especially in the context of Nigeria. That's exactly how Oduduwa was back then. There were people before him. There were kings before him, but there was no king like him. Nobody ever did what he did. He created a structure that nobody ever saw, where these communities now do not have to say, he said, come together, we're going to create a new city. There's a city center, there's a town hall, there's a palace, there's a marketplace. So you essentially have a new downtown. Then they now allocated places in Ilugogon, in the city center, Tonko, and now say, okay, let's say for instance, Iloromu, here to here, that is your own in this place. And here to here, that is your own. You, that is your own. You, that is your own. So where they used to be before, they still owned it, but they will now call those places Oko. If you grew up in Yoruba land, you would probably have heard your parents say, or maybe your elders say things like "Aun losi Igboro." The concept of Igboro for us is like you are going to the city, you are going to town. If you went to Ife or you, that's how the conductors, that's how the perosoko, tangboro. They are going to town. Where they were before the new arrangement, they still owned it. And it's some of those places that you hear they now call Oko Waju or Oko Etile or Oko Egan. Oko Etile will be the farms around you where you can grow your vegetables, right? You can just plant some things and all of that. No big deal. Oko Waju is where you have to go further. In many cases, Oko Waju is where people used to be. They never left the place, to be honest, but it's like they can come to town, but they can also live in the farm. That farm used to be their home, but it's still their home, but they have another home in the city. So most of my grandparents, for instance, my granddad, for instance, of course, we have a place in town in Ife, but our Oko is so far away from that place, but it's still ours. That same thing is what you notice in just about every Yoruba story. When Ebumawe and Osemawe, the people who became Ebumawe and Osemawe, when they got into their spaces, for instance, they were twins. One was a lady, the other was a man. Ebumawe, the one who became the Ebumawe of Agoewoye, by the way, Ebumawe and Ondo are connected. Sorry, Agoewoye and Ondo are connected. Ebumawe was the twin, the brother, who became the king of Agoewoye. The sister, Osemawe, was the one who became the king of, and I'm using king intentionally, of Ondo. By the way, when you hear the word, I could have said queen, but the reason I said king is because, for the most part, when we hear queen, most times we think of consort. So there are three types of queens. Oh boy, I'm out of the topic, but it's still part of it. So there are three. So there's queen dowager, there's queen consort, and then there's queen regnant. So the queen regnant is the queen that's like a king. For instance, Queen Elizabeth was queen regnant, but Queen Camilla is queen consort. She's a queen because she's married to the king, but Elizabeth was a queen who was reigning. So the reigning queen is the queen regnant. So the Osemawe was queen regnant or a king, right? She was the one reigning. What they usually do is this. So when they got there, the place was not empty. There were people. But just like in Ife, they were small communities. So what they did was exactly what their forefather did. He banded them together. And in some cases, whenever you were told that, oh, people are coming from Ife, for instance, there was a particular period in Yoruba history where there's a lot of royal migration from Ife. There's a lot of royal migration from out of Ife. Princes traveled out. For instance, in the 13th century, the 12th century, when Oromiyo moved to Benin, that was a royal migration. He spent 2 years in Benin, and then we didn't really enter the town. It was but that area now, everywhere is Benin. Spent 2 years there, then went to Oyo. When he moved, it was around the same time, 12th, 13th century, that period between 12th and 14th century, a lot of princes moved out of Ife, a lot. Whether you're talking about Jibogun of Ilesha, Oromiyo himself, Ogunfunminere, Awori, most of those people moved out around that period. I'm not giving you exact, I'm saying there was an era of royal migrations. When they moved out, sometimes they will find bare spaces and then they just establish their own settlements. In some cases, they will find occupied spaces. But you see, let me give you a very interesting example. Let's assume that they're living in Ife. Now, Ife has Shokwason happened shortly around the time of Oduduwa. Shokwason was one who went to Ketu. But you're right, he also moved out. Thank you, please focus. Now, let me even tell you, before I move, let me not go too fast. After Oduduwa created the city, of course, there was a city center, there was a market, there was the palace, and then you have allocations of lands to people to build stuff. Around that time, he also built city wall around Ife. Depending on the timeline, you could even say, to be honest, he actually began to build even before the end of the old, war. I know I'm rushing, but I think it's not right that I'm rushing. So let me slow down a bit. When he took over the entire place, let me tell you one of the things they did in Ife. I don't want to rush. I think it's not necessary. Let's take it one by one. When he took over the entire thing and became the king, I mean, before him there was something called, like I said, the chairman of the confederacy. So that chairman was the primus inter pares. Is the first among equals. Oduduwa was not the first among equals. Oduduwa was a divine king. But despite the fact that he was now going to be the divine king and the unifier of all the 13 communities, Ife still had to do something to ensure that he did not have absolute powers. Because we don't like the idea of tyrants. Right? So what did they do? They created a structure that allowed for him to be the executive. But they have to have a cabinet, which will be the legislature, and then they have to have the judiciary. The legislature is called the Warefa. Right? They are chiefs. But they work together to make laws for the land. And then the judiciary is called Ogboni. Now, I know that you probably hear Ogboni this and hear secret court. Well, that was not it wasn't just secret court. It was the judicial arm of government back in Ife. And then they had an arrangement also with the king. That arrangement is called Esisun. There were conventions, things he could do, things he could not do. He never had absolute powers, but he was lifted above every other deity, as a matter of fact. Now, that structure that you see in Ife is the exact same thing you see replicated everywhere. For instance, when you go to Oyo, what Oni is in Ife is what Alaafin is in Oyo. For Alaafin, of course, the first Alaafin will be Oromiyo himself, who eventually, after leaving Benin, went to Oyo, created the same thing in Oyo. The same structure his grandfather created in Ife, by the way. Oromiyo is Oduduwa's grandson. Created the same structure that his father created in Ife, and then brought in the same everything. So, for instance, the Oba, When he got there, when Oromio got to Oyo, there were also settlements in Oyo. There were settlements in Oyo, but there was no Oyo like everybody. He brought all those settlements together. And a couple of those settlements were not even Yoruba. In the established, oh boy. Guys, we are very complex people and it's lovely. In establishing Oyo, there were Nupe elements, there were Bariba elements from the very beginning. They were in the minority, but they were seen. As a matter of fact, they had representation in the parliament, in their own council. Their own king, of course, would be Alafin, but their own Iwarefa is not Iwarefa, it's Oyomesi. It's the exact same thing as what you have in Ife. They have a Bashorun, just like Ife has an Obalufe, who is the prime minister in Ife. By the way, he's still there today. There's an Obalufe right now. So you have Oni, you have Obalufe, who is the prime minister. You have the Warefa, you have the Ogboni. So you have Alafin, you have Bashorun, you have Oyomesi, then you have Ogboni in Oyo. When you, by the way, I want to allow Oyomesi, they have different names. There's Bashorun, there's Alakbini, and so on and so forth. That same structure is in Ijebu. Ogboni in Ijebu is what you call Oshugbo. It's the same thing. And of course, they also have their own structure. Now, each of them, Ashepa, thank you, each of those groups also have their own structures. So the king has his own structure. The Warefa, that's the cabinet is working with. When you now go into the Ogboni now have their own structure. So let's say Oyomesi, for instance. In Oyomesi, you see Alakbini, you see Ashepa, you see Bashoro, you see the rest of them. Those ones, they have a way they run their stuff. The Ogboni now have their own thing as well. They have Yabiye and their chiefs and the way they have their rituals, the way they do their stuff and things like that. The point is that Samu, thank you, please focus. Samu or Samu. That's in Oyo. Agba, thank you. So what you see essentially is a replication of a structure, which is why it nauseates me when people are trying to say, oh, you're Eskinekon, if Eskinekon, King Jukonlo. It doesn't make sense. The very foundation of this place was from a man who was a grandson of the person who created that place and replicated it in this place. What is the ego trip about? If you like, you can build your house to reach the skies. You can never become bigger than your father. As far as the timelines are concerned, he got here before you. Anything that makes you tell you that, anything that makes you, oh, I'm now bigger because I became something. By the way, the empire that Oyo became, Oyo was not the first empire in Yoruba land. Ife was the first empire. Oyo was an empire for 200 years, which was fantastic. But Ife was an empire for 400 years. And I know I also hear people say it's the spiritual headquarters. Ife is not it's not just the spiritual headquarters of Yoruba people. It's also the cultural and political headquarters of Yoruba people. Oyo is the political headquarters of Oyo Empire. They are two different things. Ife is not the spiritual headquarters, Oyo is political kingdom. No. Ife is the spiritual headquarters of Yoruba people, the cultural headquarters, the political headquarters. It's all of those things. Oyo is the headquarters of the Oyo Empire, which was huge and powerful. But guess what? It wasn't even every part of Yoruba land that was part of Oyo Empire, to be clear. But majority of Yoruba, everywhere you go, they'll tell you back to Ife. Now, why do they mention Ife? Because the kind of structure they were having was, so you have, during the royal migrations, people moving with the structure, the ideology, even the religion. Let me find a way to say it in a way that people will not go crazy. There were bits of our spirituality that was developed after the creation. I'll find a way to say it, because people hear funny things on social media. They will not hear what you are saying. They hear what they are thinking. But I'll say it in a way that if you don't get it, that means that you don't want to get it. After the enthronement of Oduduwa, with the creation of the new structure, there were some myths that were created at the time. And because Ife became a behemoth, like it was not just influential in terms of like, we like it, it spread, it radiated, like the brightness, civilization radiated from Ife to every part of Yoruba land and beyond. Therefore, it makes sense that people will connect themselves. As a matter of fact, everybody wanted to come from Ife. Ife was the US of the time. And why did that happen? Was it just because somebody became king? No. What happened was that after he became king, everything I'm saying, by the way, I've told you some of the books that where you can find it, but if we have to read at any point, I will read. But for now, I can still just, explain these things to you. So my flow be question and answer, going to be his full session. But I think it's becoming a session already. You see, when Oduduwa Tete, when he became the king, he didn't just create a political structure, he also created an economy that was not known before then. Now, we've been trading for a long time. We used to have a market in Ife, even before, like in the 9th century, in the 800s, where people would travel from Ekiti and buy and sell in Ife. There's always been a place, now a man wagon. But what Oduduwa did was to create, there was a product, for instance, in Ife at the time, glass bead. And I remember shared with us the other day the research of Dr. Babalola, who got the $300,000 grant. He worked on the glass beads at Olokun Grove in Ife. What Oduduwa did was to build something on that product. That product became not just, we have something. If you read the history of the Yoruba people, for instance, what you discover is that Oduduwa began to use the product to the point where it became a status symbol. So he had it around his neck, he had it on his wrists, his ankles. He was covered with beads, glass beads, shaggy, and inu. That's not glass beads. It was covered with it. The chiefs started using it. Everybody wanted to use it. It became a status symbol, and before you knew it, became the thing that we're transporting all over the place. It would go from Ife, travel all the way. Of course, we already had a trade route to Mali. Even back then, folks would travel from there to Ife. If people would travel from Ife to Mali, people were selling and buying and selling, going with caravans. We have Alajakpa, our people were selling and buying, and then the products was also moving. And as the products were moving, right, the fame of the city was also moving. And that's why by 1353, a man called Ibn Battuta visited Timbuktu in 1352. He was there from 1352 to 1353. And then he wrote about this place in the forest of Sudan. By the way, Sudan at the time, again, whenever you hear people from ancient times refer to Yoruba and Sudan, Sudan was not a country. Sudan was the name that Arabs called all of us blacks. Bilad al-Sudan means the land of the blacks. Anything from after North Africa down, all of us were Sudan, no? So if you read any ancient book and you see something Sudan there, it doesn't mean that you're from the country where they speak, where you have South Sudan, not Sudan. That's not Sudan. All of us were called Sudan at the time. As a matter of fact, in the 14th century, you know what, at this point, I think I should read. I'm going to open this book, The Yoruba, A New History by Akinwumi Ogundiran. By the way, Akinwumi Ogundiran is a professor in the US, majors in archaeological history. He's also some fantastic work. The other day, I think they were even in Oduduwa National Park, excavating. So somebody says, does that mean we were Guineans? Yes, that poet. There's a time all of us were. So it depends on who you are asking. If you ask the Portuguese in, let's say, the 14th century or 15th century, if you ask the Portuguese, I will be a Guinean. You are a Guinean. You are from Guinea. All of us are Guinea to the Portuguese. All of us are from Niger to the English person. We are from, the word Niger is Latin, it means black. It's the same word that French called Niger, right? If you ask the Arab, all of us are Sudan. I'm trying not to say Sudanese, not the country. We are all Sudan. Negro, Niger, the same thing. Thank you, FFT. So we are all Negroes, we are all niggers, we are all Niger, we are all Sudan, we are all Guinea. It depends on who you are asking. Guinea today is a couple of countries, Guinea Conakry, Equatorial Guinea. Those are the countries that came out of that arrangement. But in reality, all of us will be called Guinea at the time. So it's about the perspective or the person you're asking. Who are you asking? So when they say, oh, you're connected to Sudan, are they right? Yes. But they're talking about the Sudan as a country right now. No. You know what? When people talk about Ijebu and Sudan, do you know that the Ijebu identity was formed before Sudan was created as a country? Even as a kingdom. Leave the country for a second. Ijebu was already a kingdom before Sudan became a kingdom. But let me read something to you about Ibn Battuta. I'll read from Akim Ogundiran's book. By the way, I think I should show you what Segi looks like. Give me a second. The Yoruba A New History. So Segi will be the blue, Iyan will be the red. Share bye. All right. So this one and this one, these are the ones we're talking about. Mambo. This one. Sorry, can you see very well now? Yeah, this one and this one. So the blue one is Segi, the red one is Iyan. Okay, the economy of Ife was built around those tiny things you're looking at. Okay, another day we'll have full session on Segi and Iyan and things like that. Well, let me read. The dichroic bluish, greenish, and yellowish beads of the same HLHA. HLHA is high lime, high alumina. Chemical properties, as those of Ile-Ife, have been identified further afield. Then it says here, it's been identified in further afield from Igbo Uku in southeastern Nigeria and Benin Lafia in northeast Benin Republic to Kisi in Burkina Faso, Dioboye in Senegal, Gao and Essouk in Mali, and Kumbi Saleh in Mauritania, all in 12th to 14th century contexts. Ile-Ife, the only known industrial center for HLHA glass production, was a supplier of these beads to several locations in West Africa. As these exquisite imports permeated the subcontinental market and social lives, so did the fame of the city spread far and wide. Ibn Battuta, the 14th century globetrotting Moroccan scholar, was informed during his visit to Mali, February 1352 to December 1353, about a powerful kingdom to the south. The name of the kingdom is rendered in Ibn Battuta's travel account as Yufi, which his informants described as one of the biggest countries of the Sudan. We already talked about Sudan, Abi. One of the biggest countries of the Sudan, that of Oduduwa. And their Sultan, one of the greatest sultans. Sultan, of course, means what? King. You're talking about the Oni. But they will say it from their own perspective. They have been influenced by Arabic culture, so they will use the word Sultan. So they said Ile-Ife was the largest urban center, the biggest emporium, and the wealthiest polity in West Africa's rainforest belt, south of the Niger River, during the mid-14th century, with more than 2 centuries of trading contact with the Western Sudan. On account of these facts alone, it is the best match found. Yufi is a Mande or an Arabic transliteration of Ufe. Why is this important? You may not see the word Ife in ancient documents describing Ife. Why? We did not call ourselves Ife until very recently. We call ourselves Ufe. All right? So, and that's what I also said about the Igbo thing. The Igbo are also the Ugbo, but they're not the Igbo. So, I was saying that we're Ufe, just like we say Ugbo or Igbo. The Ugbo or Igbo in what we call Ife today are not Igbo of southeastern Nigeria. They are not connected. They were never connected. They are not connected. If there's any other way to make it clear, I will say it. They are not. The Igbo that we had in Ife, who are still there, by the way, some of them are still there in Ife, they are the ones who left, are the ones who became the Ilaje community. They are Ugbo in Ilaje, Ondo State today. They did not go to the southeast. They are not Okechukwu or Emeka. They are Yoruba people till today. Capiche? All right. So Ufe, that we called ourselves, was the same thing that they will use to write about you, because that's what you said you are. So they will write it as Ufe. So when you hear Ufe, it's the same thing like when we say Ule. Like if you talk to an Ijesha person and say Ibololo Molosi Ulesha. Ulesha is also Ilesha. Ule, Ushu, Ishu. So that's how the Portuguese established contact. Who cares? I'm not talking about what's my business with Benin Kingdom. Kilo Konro, Kila Sodoro. When is your turn? I will let you know. Don't worry. So that's how you have that kind of thing. At this time in history, this was about the height of the empire. The empire was from the 11th century, right, to the 15th century. This is happening in the mid 14th century. If it was an empire from the 11th to the 15th century, all right, Oyo became an empire in the 17th century, and it was an empire until the 19th century. So it was for 200 years, if it was for 400 years. All right. So it says here that it was the largest urban center and the biggest emporium and wealthiest polity in West Africa's rainforest belt, south of the Niger River. That happened because of economic power. And that's why I say to people, when they say something about, when you hear the word Ife, and people say things like it's the spiritual capital, it is denigrating to what Ife really stands for. It wasn't just spiritual. There are terracotta heads that are dated to 10th century AD found in Ife. It was a center of art and craft. And now that somebody mentioned Benin, let me quickly tell you something about Benin. The man who went to create the group of craftsmen in Benin, his name is Ugwege. That's what they called him in Benin. Ugwege was an Ife man that was invited to Benin by Oba Ogola, right? And this must be in the 1400s, there in the 14th century. And that was how, you got the blessing of the crafts that you have in Benin right now. So thank God for Igwege. I know you guys change your history just like the Igbos, but everybody be all right. Let's get back. People started changing history. And those books, thank God, they are still available. And we have them. Praise the Lord. So back to what I was saying. So it was the spiritual capital thing also is true, because they created new religious forms, new religious ideas in that space. And they did it because it also helped to create structure and order in society, right? Lots of stuff were formed around that time. The democratization of certain things like Ifa, for instance, also happened around the time of Oduduwa. The establishment of proper structure and order also happened around that time. So his influence, of course, there's political part of it, there's economic part of it, there's spiritual part of it, and of course there's cultural part of it. Now, when his children and grandchildren moved out of Ife, they took those things with them, and that's why you hear these things. Have you ever heard this statement, beaded crown or beaded staff? Have you ever heard the statement beaded crown before? Let me just ask, have you ever heard the word beaded crown? Shetigbori? Does he have a beaded crown? Johnny beaded crown. Do you know why it's important? Okay, thank you. The beaded crown, you've not heard it before. Okay, if a king doesn't have a beaded crown in Yoruba land, he's a recent king. Even if he's recent self, they will still make sure that they find a way to get him a beaded crown. Beads, that word beaded, look for the word bead. That bead is the connection to Ife. They call it Adayeba or Adenla. I mean, there are different things on it. It's not just the bead, though. There are other things, there are different motifs on it. That bead is a connection because that bead was the mainstay of the economy of Ife, and it was a luxury item. It was, think of Prada, Gucci, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, everything combined into one. That was what Segi and Inyo were. It was a status symbol. You could go to a place and drop your bead as payment. God bless you. Ada for our own. You hear Okpa Leke. Odade owo, owo Okpa Leke. What's the meaning of Ade owo? What's the meaning of Okpa Leke? Nǹkan tó dé yẹn ìlẹ̀kẹ̀ ló wà lára rẹ̀, ṣùgbọ́n ìlẹ̀kẹ̀ yẹn owó ni. Nǹkan tí kábíyèsí dé, adé tó ń pè ní adé owó, ó dádé owó, ó tẹ̀pá ìlẹ̀kẹ̀. Ìlẹ̀kẹ̀ is also that connection. So the Okpa and the Ade are always from Ife. Or were always from Ife. These things are in some of the books I mentioned earlier. And if we have to read, if any question comes that requires me to read, I'll read those things. But I'm going somewhere with this question. I'll try and get there very fast. So as they were going, they had to go back home, or they took that thing from there as they were traveling. Let me give you an example. 1903, there was an incident in, it was in Remo, but the judgment happened in Lagos. The governor at the time was McGregor. McGregor was in charge, and there was an issue between the Akarigbo and the Elekpe. Elekpe wanted to be crowned, and he wanted a crown. He wanted to be made king, first class king. And the Akarigbo said no. And they were trying to sort the matter. Oyinbo asked the native authority, they asked everybody who can solve this issue. They didn't know how. They tried to ask. So when they went to meet the native authority, the Agbalagbas, they said, listen, to solve this person, we have one king who is the king of all Yoruba land. All the people that are called Yoruba people, like whether they're Yoruba or Karojiri or Ife, whatever you call them, we have one person who is the paramount ruler of everybody. Is the Oni. The only problem is that he doesn't leave his palace. The idea of the Oni not living in his palace is another historical matter that we will talk about maybe if time permits. So they sent message to the Oni. This was 1903. They talked about the sacrifices, the things they had to do. When Kabesi left the palace in 1903, every single Yoruba king left their palaces. Every single one of them. And that's why I say all these things that's making people say Yokonlo, it doesn't even make sense to ask that question. Oh, somebody was king before Oyinbo came. It doesn't make sense. If you need Oyinbo to even be telling you, it means that you don't know your history. Every single Yoruba king left their palaces until Kabesi got back home. And when he got there, what did he use? When they asked him if Elekpe was supposed to be a king, he said, you know what? Including about Benin, all of them. That's why Nigeria is what happened to their history. Everybody's just changing their history. Everybody's waxing lyrical now and just saying funny things. These things are written, by the way. 1 second. I'll see if I can quickly find it. If not, I'll just keep talking. Because of time, I didn't really prepare to read anything. Everybody, please focus. Everybody left their palaces. Why? Your God left the palace. Let's say the way it is. Your God left the palace. It doesn't leave. You know, let me while I'm trying to find the page. I found it, Seth. I found it. Let me not waste time to explain. It's not even wastage. There's not time wasting, but let's stay on topic. This book is called City of 201 Gods, Ile-Ife in Time, Space and Imagination by Jacob Olukbono. Ha! Oh boy. I've missed this book. I've not opened this book in a long time. But let's just read the word that we need for now. In another historical context illustrating multiple layers of religious traditions, we can examine the experiences of the Ooni and the British colonial governor in 1903, which I will consider in detail later in this book. The British colonial governor requested that the Ooni travel from the sacred city of Ile-Ife to the city of Lagos to settle a dispute as to whether a Yoruba king in Ekpe, now part of the state of Ogun, was a legitimate descendant of Oduduwa and therefore entitled to wear the sacred crown. The governor's request was unprecedented. From the beginning of time, the Ooni had never vacated the sacred city of Ile-Ife. The Ooni embodies the sacred center that radiates out. By the way, let me stop to say that word I used earlier. When I used it, I was going to say something. When you hear about radiation, I was talking to somebody yesterday, I said, every time I say, oh, we meet here Mondays to Fridays, 1 p.m. Ife time. The reason I started saying that thing, and I've been saying it for a long time, the reason I started saying it really was that in Yoruba land, we say, Ile Ife nibito jumo ti mo wa. Ojumo, in other words, we look up to Ife for the dawn of the new day. Like, that's what the term is. It doesn't mean it's in the east. It's talking about glory. It's talking about civilization. It's from there it emanates. It's from there it radiates. And it's in the person of the Ooni. When you see the Ooni, I mean, times have changed. But when you see the Ooni, that is the representation of everything that makes anybody connected to the identity of Yoruba. That is the personification of all the glory of the race. You know, like the Bible says of Jesus, that is the express image of the unseen being. Oni is the express image of Yoruba identity, and it's also from him that the glory, radiates. All right. By the way, that's why everybody always looks towards Ife. That's one of the reasons. There are many reasons. We're not getting into everything, but that's one of the reasons. Let's continue here. So it says, from the beginning of time, the Ooni had never vacated the sacred city of Ile-Ife. The Ooni embodies the sacred center that radiates out from Ile-Ife on physical, temporal, and spiritual planes. In the new era, however, the Ooni opted for a radical break with tradition by lending his traditional authority to British rule, to the great dismay of many Yoruba Oba in cities as diverse as Oyo, Ijebu, Abeokuta, or Ondo. The Ooni granted the request of the colonial governor and made the astonishing trip to Lagos. I'm coming. There's another thing I'm looking for. I'm almost there. So that's from Olupono's book. Under the British system of indirect rule, the colonial government had created a new city legislative council in charge of the affairs of the new region. In 1903, a dispute between two Yoruba rulers, the Elekwe of Ekpe in Ijebu Remo and the Akarigbo of Ijebu Remo, was referred to the State Legislative Council for adjudication. Please take a listen to this. This is actually very nice. Like, you're going like this. You will like this. But I have to mute a retard who just strolled in. This is not your dad's house. That's where they raise fools. You can go back home, eh? God bless you. Samekin, Busu, are you really a pastor? Why do you ask that question? By the way, Samekin, are you a Yoruba person? So I would know exactly what to tell you. Why do you ask the question? Guys, sorry, I apologize for the break. Why are you asking if I'm really a pastor? What does that have to do with the history of Yoruba people? Oh, he's an Igbo man. Oh, okay. You just want to know. Okay. Let's just continue. Under the British system of indirect rule, the colonial government had created a new city legislative council in charge of the affairs of the new region. In 1903, a dispute between two Yoruba rulers, the Elekwe of Ekpe, I don't want to say Ekpe, in Ijebu Remo, and the Akarigbo of Ijebu Remo was referred to the State Legislative Council for adjudication. The Akarigbo protested the Elekpes wearing a beaded crown. That's what I was looking for. In fact, this is what I was searching for. The Akarigbo protested the Elekpe wearing a beaded crown. Remember that's where we started from, beaded crown. The beaded crown was a sign that you were connected to the throne of Oduduwa. That's why all paramount kings must get their crowns from Ife. The Akaribo protested the Elekpes wearing a beaded crown, which by tradition could be worn only by an Oba claiming direct descent from Oduduwa, who had been authorized to wear the crown by the Oni of Ife. The reigning Oni was Adelekon Olubuse. Olubuse, that's the grandfather of Obashejo Adetonwaja Obano. At the suggestion of the council members, the Oni was invited to Lagos in February 1903 to rule on the matter. Now, it gets interesting. Hidden behind a screen. Oh man, times have changed. Oni could not be seen. Okay? And this is not the only book that talks about the fact that you couldn't see him. There are many books. If, for instance, I don't talk about Benin for now, but wherever people were sent to him, they will be outside the curtain. Give an example. Whenever, and this is not a jab or anything, it's just history. Whenever a king was to be enthroned in Benin, for instance, they will send messengers to Ife. When they got to Ife, and they will tell Oni, whatever it is they're doing, what the person needs to see in order to know that the Oni is favorably disposed towards what he has come to tell him, was for him to show his foot. Once you saw the foot, that means that you got what you're looking for. Nobody really saw him. We'll read that later, but if we have to. Anyway, again, it says, hidden behind a screen, since it was forbidden to behold the face of the Oni answered all the questions the council put to him. He denounced the Elekwe, lamenting that if it were the old days, the Oni would have summoned the Elekwe to Ile-Ife and had him beheaded. What happened between the Oni and the British governor after the meeting must be the subject of another work. In short, the Oni was entertained by the governor in a private meeting, and upon the Oni's safe, listen to this, upon the Oni's safe return to Ile-Ife, the Yoruba Obas returned to their palaces. It was after the Oni go back home. This is not 12th century or 15th century. This is 1903. The Oba of Oyo, the Olowo, Aojale, they were protesting. Like, no, Kabesi, you can't go and meet anybody. They didn't want him to go out. But of course, it was an issue that nobody else could solve, and the governor didn't know what to do. On a normal day, what should happen is that they will bring those two to Ife. And then the Oni will then adjudicate or pronounce judgment. But in this particular matter, of course, we now have Oyinbo. I needed to solve the problem. But all these other things were like, Kabesi, you can't go, But eventually they had to say, we have to solve this thing. When he moved, everybody vacated their palaces. They only returned after he returned. Now, that was not even the topic. Where was I? I was talking about the beaded crown. So the beaded crown became, let me talk to you about the beaded crown. It became a symbol of authority. Remember, just quickly open. Oni was referred to as the Oni was not second in command to Orisha. No. Oni was not second in command to Orisha. Oni is not Alashe Keji Orisha. And Oni is Olorio Balaye, but himself is Oni Risha. Sorry, I'm responding to somebody on YouTube. He is not Igbakeji Orisha. He is the Orisha himself. This book, by the way, one of those books, depending on who you ask, 201 gods, 401 gods. That's one on top. That's the Oni. No, Adimula is originally actually Oni Lonja Adimula. And to Adimu, that's Ila. Oni Gangan Lonjebe. On long, kidding about your man Latijo. So it says, every significant detail of the palace building, the carvings of the wooden pillars and doors, the murals on the walls, and so on, all were iconographic statements relating to the aspect of the origins of the kingdom, the Oduduwa source of its royal dynasty, the all-pervading oversight and care of the gods, the perpetual presence of the kings who had ruled in the palace, the visible and invisible powers of or authority of the king, the conical beaded crown said to originate in Oduduwa's time, and therefore known as the Great Crown or the Crown of Oduduwa. By the way, that's the crown that Kabesi wears once a year in Ife during Olojo. Ompeni Adeari. Everyone wears it. All right. Thank you very much for listening. I think we pretty much answered the question. There were other things in the comment section while I was playing, but I hope you got the crux of it. It wasn't supposed to be a full-on session on Ife history or Yoruba history, just to answer the question that the gentleman asked at the beginning when he asked if there were kings in Ife, and that if Oduduwa was not the first king or the first man, why does our story begin with Oduduwa? And in case you join us later, the short answer is that Oduduwa is the progenitor of Yoruba people, not necessarily, I'm talking history now, not necessarily because he was the first human being that they saw, because of course we know when it came on, the scene, but because everything that was before him pales in comparison to what he brought to bear, especially in the political and economic and even spiritual life of Ife. And that then became the basis for everything that has happened in Yoruba land, whether in economy, in politics, in religion, in culture, and in things like that. Therefore, it becomes to us what Christ is, where we say before Christ and Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. So everything before him pales in comparison to everything he did. Therefore, it's as if with him we had a new beginning. And we mentioned also that it's similar to how we look at our world today. It's not like there were no nationalists before Papa. There were Yoruba nationalists in the 1920s, in the 30s. In the 20s, we had the Erikas, we had the Herbert Macaulays, we had the H.O. Davises, the J.C. Vaughan. We had a lot of Yoruba people who were actually, nationalists, and we're also trying to make the Yoruba land great and everything, but nobody compares to Awo. He even had peers, like we're doing a session now on Awolowo and Akintola, which we're going to continue tomorrow, 1 p.m. Ife time tomorrow. There are other people that lived around the same time as Papa, but nobody comes close. Therefore, regardless of where you are from in Yoruba land, this has nothing to do with being from Ikene. Regardless of where you are from in Yoruba land, if you're discussing Yoruba politics in Nigeria, it begins with Awo. And that doesn't mean that there was nobody before him, but he's our father because everything before him pales in comparison to what he did and the foundation he laid for subsequent generations. That's how you have heroes, that's how you have fathers, not necessarily by asking, and when it comes to the question itself of, was it the first king, there's something I usually say, that Oduduwa was not the first king in Ife, but he was the first king of Ife. In other words, in recent times, some half-educated clowns are on social media saying things like, oh, there were other kings before me, there were Kinekon king, then they will mention one ridiculous number. And when they say that in their minds, they're actually saying something grand. No, what they're saying is stupid. The idea that there were kings in a place before a particular person doesn't change the fact that that person is the first king of that space. So what that means basically is that there were many kings in that space, but none of them united the entire space to rule over the space as one, right? So you had autonomous communities like some people still have in some parts of Nigeria, each community having their own kings, and then the communities come together and say, we're going to have a confederacy where there will be a chairman, not the king, but the chairman of the kings. That's Proverbs inter pares. It's the first among equals. It's the first among equals. The king, the head of the kings, but not the head of the town, because there was no town. in the sense that we now see it. And it was from Oduduwa that we learned urbanization in Yoruba land because of the kind of political system that he brought, because of the kind of structure that he created. We then replicated that in different other spaces, whether it's in Oyo or in Ekiti or in Ondo or in the Awori kingdoms, in different parts of Yoruba land. We then replicated that so that we now have, and that's why today, if you can Google this now, Yoruba is one of the most urbanized people on the continent. And that happened because of the political structure. A structure that says instead of having small villages where you are prone to all kinds of issues, right, and threats, why not come together, have a city or a town, and then your villages can still serve for whatever reason, maybe as farms or whatever, but you have a city center, you have a new town that you can go to, and everybody has a home, and then your former dwelling becomes essentially your maybe your place of work if you're a farmer. That is one of the reasons we are very, very urbanized, right? The concept of city building is not new to us as Yoruba people. We've been doing it for more than 1,000 years. So people have not thought about it, but may God help them at some point. The point is that the reason for that was the political structure that Oduduwa introduced. And so when people say things like, was it the first person? It doesn't really matter. It's not about longevity or even about the date of the arrival or of the, there's a word I'm looking for, enthronement. It's about what the person did, while they were here. And also, we also mentioned that when we say the time he started doing it, it doesn't mean that he came from outside Yoruba land. Oduduwa is Yoruba through and through. There's no migration from Mecca. There's nothing from outside the place. And the clowns in the comment section earlier were talking about Benin. Benin did not even exist. And I try not to go into Benin story because it's not like there's anything that I want to get out of it apart from the fact that you guys are just irritant. The truth is, the Benin story began with Obagodo, who beneath themselves in their own stories call Oduduwa's son, and who happens to be the very first Ogiso. Today is not the day, but if you guys keep disturbing, maybe one of these days I'll just, my shiwe and take on you. I'll probably just go into your history because, again, some of you, for whatever reason, which is definitely because of inferiority, you have this delusions of grandeur where you're saying you're bigger than what you are. Just be happy and be secure in who you are. Don't try to, shout, oh, Yoruba. We are bigger than, we're not bigger than anything. All right. Somebody says, was Oduduwa the king of Okiora before the fight with Obatala? Some people call him one of the leaders there. So he's been called a leader in Okiora, right? But the whole thing with Obatala was about leadership, right, amongst the 13 communities. And that's why when push came to shove, some of the leaders were on the side of Oduduwa, some of the leaders were on the side of Obatala. But it should also be said that they were able to reconcile, right? And Obatala came back to town after being in Idita Oko. They settled, they came up with a new structure that ensured that every single person, whether they were leaders before the new dispensation or leaders that were on the side of Oduduwa, everybody had a place. And that's also one of the beautiful things. I'm answering the question in the comment section. That's one of the beautiful things about our history. One of the things I notice sometimes is that people like to rewrite stuff. In Yoruba land, you acknowledge things, but you make sure you resolve it so that you don't have to shy away from it. All right? The reason we can acknowledge it is because our parents resolved it. So every year, for instance, we have Itakwa, where we reenact the battle between Oduduwa and Obatala. We don't hide it. And the reason is, one of the beautiful things about it, of course, not so we don't forget, but beyond that is also that they were able to create a structure that also recognized the importance of those people. And that's why I say, if you look at our history as Yoruba people, I would rather do what my fathers did than to be shouting, no victor, no vanquished. When you do no victor, no vanquished, what you have done is, Odabi Ejotan Giniru. Right? I've said it several times, Nigeria came up with this interesting idea. I mean, most likely out of good intentions. No victor, no vanquished. And I had a session here before when I talked about three V's. If there's no victor and no vanquished, there will be another V, because there can't be a vacuum. And that other V will be victims. And that's why you see that certain people, the only thing they hold on to is to be victims. They can't say they are victors because they didn't win anything. They don't want to claim they are vanquished because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that they lost. So they just take the victimhood path, right? But in Yoruba history, what we do is we know the victor, we know the vanquished, but the vanquished is not made to see is not made to feel like is nothing, and the victor doesn't have everything. There's something like winner takes all, and that's what led to what we call in Ife a Sisu, where they had to create a structure that, number one, even the king Oduduwa himself did not have absolute authority. They made sure that there was checks and balances. You had to have this here, that here. You had chiefs here. You had people you had to listen to, people you had to answer to, or people that you're answerable to. All right. So even Obatala himself was also, and by the way, when it was time to deify him, he was also deified. It wasn't like, oh, he lost, therefore, no, that's not how we do things in Yoruba. And I think that's something to learn from our elders and from our fathers, that you acknowledge who won and who lost, but there's no winner takes all. In other words, everybody gets something out of it, so that you know that it's not for your ego, it's for the people, it's for the land. It's good enough that you won, but you can't be rubbing it in people's faces. So I hope I answered that question. I was saying also that, there's a question somebody asked earlier. I think it was on YouTube. Yes, YouTube. Somebody said they would like to ask questions. So let me just check to see if we have the questions now. By the way, those who said they couldn't see anything. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, I don't come on camera. I will just have short sessions. Someone says, wasn't Obagodo a pre-Oduduwa prince of the Obatala dynasty? No, Obagodo was not a pre-Oduduwa prince. So Obagodo was not a pre-Oduduwa prince. There's a book called The Intelligence Report of Benin by H.F. Marshall. It was published in 1941. Mentions how Obagodo left Ife, got some stuff from. If you look at Benin's, gosh, man, I have to mention because you asked the question. So Benin has two myths of origin. The first one is based on the Ogiso dynasty. The other one is based on the Oba dynasty. The one based on the Ogiso says that Obagodo, left his father Oduduwa his father gave him, when he was about to leave Ife, his father Oduduwa gave him a pouch containing sand, and then he had snail shells, and they started pouring the sand. He went eastwards, and as he was going, he was creating land until they got to Benin. That's their own story. So even in their story, they acknowledged that he was the son of Oduduwa, and you find this in H.F. Marshall's work. You also see it in the book by Gareva, A Short History of Benin. You even see it in there's something that this the Oba wrote. So by Redua, right? The only difference is that he will call him Oba, but it's actually the Ogiso. That was the beginning of the Ogiso dynasty. Forget all the things that you find on social media where they say they've been having Ogiso for 1,000 years. Is a lie. It did not begin until around the 12th century. And if you're looking for a document to actually understand this a bit better, you can read this stuff. Dear Lord, what's the title? Ancient Benin Kings, where they came from, is by Dimitri Bondarenko, and he has some fantastic work on Benin. So anybody who's interested could read that. So Obagodo was seen by them, by the way, right now I'm telling you Benin history, not from Ife perspective, but from their perspective. Short History of Benin was written in 1934. Intelligence Report was written in 1941. And there's congruence. We didn't have any different history of Benin until 1970. It was in early 1970 that I started changing their history. All right, but originally, Obagodo was the very first, and the first three Ogisos were also Yoruba. There was Obagodo, there was Ere, and there was Orire. Those were the first three Ogisos. And then you had all the other ones before the final one, Owodo, and then you now had Avian, and so on and so forth. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that even in that regard when they come around and start saying, I said that because somebody came up earlier and said, oh, Oduduwa was from Benin. Oduduwa could not be from Benin because there was no Benin at the time, to be honest. Even Oromiyan didn't enter Benin. It was the fourth Oba that got into Benin. Erika did not get into Benin. And there's no, all those nonsense history that Benin people like to tell themselves. You can, like your king advice, these are things that you can say among yourselves, make yourselves happy, but don't bring it outside. It should make you look like a fool, because it makes no sense. All right. Any other questions before we go? Someone says, how about Orunmila? What was his timeline? Did he live through the time of Oduduwa and Obatala? So, this is what we have discovered, that Orunmila lived before their era. Most books will not put a date to when he lived, but I found two books that actually mention, they give a date to Orunmila Tongbe. So if you read this book called Ifa Festival or Doing Ifa by Abosede Emmanuel, or you read Kintatoway, Orunmila and Socrates, two patron saints of classical philosophy by Sophie Oluwole, they put the date at around 500 BC. So that would be centuries before Oduduwa, just like Oramfe. It will be centuries before Oduduwa, right? With a different time. But, so there are certain characters in our history that are composite in nature. I'll find a way to explain that. Composite in the sense that, let's say for instance, let me put it this way. Let's say for instance, Papa Awo has been out of this, physical space since 1987. We believe his spirit is still here. Now, if, let's say another person rises, let's say Bolage, when he was alive, we started calling him Awolowo. And then he also has proteges, and we called him Awolowo. And in our own generation, we have another person. Over time, Omar Dabimpe Awo has lived for like centuries. But Awo actually came and did what he did. And then I want Tom B. And when I say B, I'm not talking about biological. I'm talking about ideological, I want Tombi will then take on his character, or sometimes even take on his name. And that's actually what happens with some of our philosophers, our major philosopher. There are things, for instance, and if you're going to have a session on this thing, maybe it will be a lot easier to explain, that there are certain things that would be said. Let me use this example. Let me use a Greek example. So Socrates wrote nothing, all right? Aristotle, I don't even think he wrote either, but Plato wrote a lot of stuff. Plato was Aristotle's disciple. Aristotle was Socrates' disciple. Now, there are things that Plato would write and say Socrates said. So imagine Plato took on the name, nomenclature, and people just, even if it's just Plato, they'll still, out of respect, maybe big today or something like that. But the point is, you find a lot of things that are credited to Orunmila that came, with the people that came much after. All of that to say that with Orunmila, what happened is that by the time of Oduduwa, a lot of things were now restructured. A lot of things were restructured to give the to create more structure. How do I put it now? Like, you have more order, you have more structure. Things were better structured from Oduduwa, even in religious terms. And that's why I'm also very careful when people use religion as a basis for Yoruba identity. It's a very warped understanding. It's what will make somebody look at you and say something like, people that are worshipping Kiniko in Brazil are more Yoruba than Yoruba people at home, like Kiniko. They didn't do everything based on religion. They were very smart thinking people who understood the place of the spiritual, but who were not just defining their identity based on religion. So there were things that were done. I don't want to go into it now because it's something that I'll have to show my face and bring books. Now, if you're interested, let me know. We can have those sessions. Most likely, it's going to be closed doors because I don't want all this where we just you have more ignorant people insulting you for things they don't know than actually just settling down to say, maybe I have questions to ask and I can learn. Just like all of us need to learn, to be clear. But we'll have that conversation. But the short answer to your question is they did not live in the same time period. Oromila came much earlier than Oduduwa. I'm talking about the history now, not the myth. If you're talking about the myth now, that's a totally different thing. And it's also important for me to say that when it comes to the myth, Oduduwa will be Olodumare sending Obatala to create the earth, and then Oduduwa, comes along later and then finishes the work, right? And even that, if you study Yoruba history very well, you will understand why they created that myth the way it is. But that's not today's topic. Someone says, if Obagodo was Oduduwa's son and Oromiyan was his grandson, then how could 13 Ogiso have ruled between Obagodo, the first Ogiso, and Oromiyan, the first of Benin? It doesn't add up. The question you should ask is this: how did they choose the Ogisos? The Ogisos were not kings. It was gerontocracy. It was gerontocracy. It was similar to what we had in Ife before Oduduwa, where you had the confederacy, where the eldest of the people was one who led them. It's not like you are 13, you now become king until 70. You are king, you now become king until 100 and something. You were the eldest, the oldest man amongst this group, normal Mula to lead one. So the Ogiso dynasty wasn't just something that young people were there and everybody. And by the way, the numbers also are different depending on what you are reading. If you read some of these new revisions from Benin, they'll give you one very long list. It's a lie. Okay, it's a lie. Also, there's also something about the word son or mokinika in Yoruba. Even you find this also in Hebrew, even in Greek. I think it's in many ancient religions. The concept of sonship is not necessarily biological. Okay, it's not necessarily biological. You would have people call, I could go someplace, maybe because they've heard me speak about Awolowo a lot, and they say, oh, my Awolowo. That does not mean that I'm related to him biologically. All right, so you could have a son that comes even generation that the man, Toje Baba, was not even Otilo, but you still have people call Enye his son. But that doesn't change the fact that Obagodo is known as his son, Oromiyan is known as his grandson. And again, it also doesn't mean that he had just one son. That's why the concept that Oyo made very popular, Samuel Ajayi Crowther made very popular, was an Oyo concept. The idea that Oduduwa had one son, his name was Okambi, that's not true. It's not true. Okay, the idea that he had one son. That thing is things that people tell themselves. You will not hear that story in Ife. Okay, so yeah, they had Ogiso dynasty, and eventually they had. As a matter of fact, even the Oba dynasty did not even happen immediately after the Ogiso dynasty. Okay, so he took over, and then he had a son, Ogiame. He had sons, but the one to shine lead was Ogiame. He wanted his son to take over, but it was not. So before him, Ogisos were not necessarily, the Ogiso dynasty was not necessarily hereditary in nature. He was going to introduce that, and they now sent for someone from Ife, because remember, the very first 3 Ogisos were from Ife. They then sent a message to them in Ife. The Ife sent someone that they killed. Okay? And that plot was hatched by Evia himself. Before they now went again, and then Oromiyan eventually arrived, and when he did, they didn't even bother going to meet them inside that place. Many of the chiefs, a lot of them were Yoruba, were already out. Some of them joined them. There's a place they called that place, I'll see if I can remember. Right? But yeah, so it adds up if you understand. I think it becomes easier to understand it once you get the system of government. So let me give an example. Let me even give one for the example. Kubo. Do you know that this present governor of Oyo State has crowned 3 Olubadons? And the one before him crowned maybe 3 or 4. So think about it. How many years? Not started pay Bimeji. or around Ogun Odun, on that ni at the Ibadan that Olubadan be méje. The reason is because Olubadan is gerontocracy. It's usually what it dagba ko to le di kábíyèsí. If you look, if you doubt it, you can actually just study this thing. Just look at Olubadan, use it as an example. That's an example of gerontocracy. Although that's not exactly what they're doing, but that's what it became because most of them ultimately di Kabese. Someone says, somehow in my heart, I believe Ajayi Crowther is a sellout. It is just my opinion though. Ajayi Crowther was not a sellout. It wasn't. Please, well, thank God you said your opinion. Maybe one of these days we'll have a session and we'll read some of these things. Ajayi Crowther was not a sellout. Ajayi Crowther did more for Yoruba people than 90% of Yoruba people that ever lived in the last 100 years. And that is not my opinion. That is a historical fact. Ajayi Crowther did more for Yoruba people than, I would say, more than 90% of Yoruba people that have lived in the last 100 years. Don't let's crucify our heroes because we don't agree with one thing or the other that they did. It's not fair, not just to them, or it's not fair to us. That means we have nobody to, because if you're looking for perfection in your heroes, you have nobody to look up to. There is not one person that you can say, oh, is a person we look up to that doesn't have one fault or the other. Because they are humans at the end of the day. But you cannot say because of their frailties, you don't want to consider them heroes because there's something they did you don't like. Therefore, they are sellouts. What would you call him a sellout? It was so bad that himself and some of the first set of ministers had to pull out of Anglican Church and create African Church. Have you ever asked why did they pull out to start African Church in 1901? There's a reason. And if they did that, that tells you wasn't a sellout. If you know what happened that led to that. So I understand you said it's your opinion, but I think one of the reasons and I've seen a lot of people say things like this, is because sometimes we expect perfection from our heroes. Just remember that if you do well in life, you'll become heroes to some people. And trust me, there's no way you want to live this life that are going to be perfect. Me, everything was sort of God self. So when it comes to perfection, let's just leave that one alone. Just do the best you can. And if you make any mistakes, the next generation, if they have sense, they'll be able to learn from what you have done without just crucifying you for some mistakes. But yeah, no, it's fine, Michelle. You said it's just your thoughts, so that's okay. But I've heard several people say it. And one day I had a session on Ajayi Crowther, I think it was last year, and people who, when I started, they were insulting him, saying, "Oh, he did this, he did that, he did this, he did that." I said, you know what? Let me not talk about what you're saying that he did. Let me tell you his story. So, and just like we're doing with Akintola now, so we went back and started from the beginning, how he was born, how he was captured, how he was sold from person to person, you know, how he eventually got on the ship, how they were going to, take him on the ship to Brazil. Excuse me, how the ship was, halted, how he got to Freetown. By the time we're done with that bit, everybody was like, wait though. We've never thought of it like this. I'm like, because you can't discuss history in a vacuum as if the guy just appeared and became a sellout. No, he had the journey. And one of the funny things I see about Ajayi Crowther, when people say things like, oh, he became a Christian, and he was a Sabo. So I asked them a question. If you were being taken as a slave, and you've been sold from Oduduwa be a meta, because Entokwa Ajayi Crowther Kroni Ìṣògùn Onkolo lọ sí inú ọkọ̀ ojú omi o. From that raid in Ìṣògùn near Ọ̀yọ́, he was sold again and again and again. It was now, at that time, it was with his mother. They separated them. He found a sister. They separated them. He was living somehow, and you were taken to a foreign country, and somebody preached to you, or somebody saved your life. You really think you're just going to say the person is nonsense? That's one. So let's even talk about this for a second. How would you feel towards that person who saved you? I don't care about the history of what made them save you. The fact that they saved you is enough to change your mind about who they are. That's one. Number two, Having become what he became, what was the relationship between him and the whites? Number 3, what was the relationship between him and other missionaries, white missionaries in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, and how did that go? There are things that we need to study, and hopefully as we have these sessions, we're going to get into some of them. But thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. So Kubo says, I must have known at least 10 Olubadan, of which Ashanke reigned longest at 15 years. You know what? I think I have a book here. Give me a second. Let me read to you. I think I have a book on Olubadan here. You'll find this funny, I think. But Mumbo. Okay, sorry about that. Let me look for, I found the book. This book is called The Traditional Rulers of a Great City, Ibadan Land, A Tale of 7 Hills and Notable Events in Nigeria by Prince Olubunmi Oyebi Dada Padare. There's an interesting list here. Mumbo. This gives you an idea how, when we think of kings, you know, that's from town to town, it takes on different hues. Mumbo. I'm seeing the stages of chieftaincy. So I want to find the names of the Olubadan that we have had. Shebilo Asha. I'm trying to find something. You know what? I think it's on the other. Let me look for it somewhere else, so that we don't waste time. Okay, I found it. So Lagelu was 1820. You mentioned a particular king. Let me use that as a basis of the conversation. So you mentioned Ashanke. Okay. Oba Ashanke became king in 1983. Okay. Oba Ashanke became king in 1983. He was king for 10 years. He used to follow the Ashanike. For me personally, I grew up in Ibadan. I was born in Ibadan. He's the first king I knew about growing up. Okay, okay. So since him, he was Olubadan from 83 to 93. Then there was Adegbega Okperinde. There's Yuniso Gundipe, Samuel Ojulano, Saliu Akanmu, Moshood Olalekan Ishola Balogun, Oba Akinloye Owolabi Iyanda Olakuleyin. It's 2024 to 2025. So you look, that is Yuniso Gundipe Larapashowu. This Babatoji Larapashowu, he became king in 1999. He passed on in 2007. So from Ashanke, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 now. And since I was born in Ife, we've only had 2. And Ashanke is the one that lived the longest. He was there for 10 years. Many of them, after him, Oba Okperinde lived for 5 years. Reigned for 5 years. Rapacho was there for 8 years. Odugade was there for 9 years. Adetunji was there for 5 years. Olalekan Ishola Balogun 2 years. The last Papa Tonwa Jansin, Owolabi Iyanda Olakuleyin 1 year, 2024-2025, and now we have another one. So because once Dagba Koto Bosori Apere, ó yàtọ̀ sí bí àwọn ìlú mi ṣe lè rí. Irú nísìnyí báyìí Ọba Àwùjalẹ̀, Ọba Síkírù Adétọ̀nà tó gbẹ́sẹ̀ nsìn. He was there for more than 50 years. He was there since the 1960s. So that means my older brother would have known only one Ijebu king, right? In my family, the only person who would know another Ijebu king would be my parents. I'm talking in terms of Bonju Moba. So bó ṣe rí nìyẹn bó a lè fi Ìjẹ̀bú yẹn wá fi wé nǹkan tó ṣẹlẹ̀ ní Benin. The closest thing would be nǹkan tó ṣẹlẹ̀ ní Ìbàdàn. Okay. I think that explains it. But thank you very much for highlighting Obashanke. Who is Chidum? Oh. I swear that just did not respond. It says, okay. I'm reading Mr. Loede's response. It says, Bantu origin Japan. Okay. Anyway, I think we covered a bit of ground. Tomorrow is Independence Day. Hey, let us clap for Nigeria. Someone said there's underground noise. Baby, my brother. There's a school around me. All right. And by the way, this is where we're working on building a studio where we won't have to be bothered about the noise. Now I'm using a noise cancellation device, and even then the noise still gets in, so I apologize for that. But please support us as we build our studio. Thank you very much. Once we build it, you shall not be hearing any noises in the background. Yes, I was going to clap for Nigeria's Independence Day tomorrow, so let's quickly do that, and then I said what I want to say that I can do that. Sheikh Bosha. Kò ṣiṣẹ́ o. Kò ṣiṣẹ́ ṣá. Mo ń bọ̀. Mo ti sọ pé màá pàtẹ́, a gbọ́dọ̀ pàtẹ́ yìí, mo ń bọ̀. Sorry about the noise. Sorry about that. Great. So it's Independence Day tomorrow. We're going to be celebrating Nigeria 65. We have questions. So we'll probably deal with those questions, and then we'll continue the series on Akintola and on Awolowo. We met Akintola yesterday, so tomorrow we'll be going deeper into his politics. We'll be getting into Awolowo and Akintola from tomorrow. So we'll be here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Ife time, West African time. Any other questions? Let me see if there's any other thing before we go. Okay, nothing. But sure, we are be or some of the crowd very soon. Ojo kan ma ṣe kin lórí ẹ̀. Kó bá lè yé gbogbo àná ni gbogbo àná là ń kẹ́kọ̀ọ́. Kò sẹ́ni tó mọ̀ tán. Ọlọ́run ràn gbogbo wa lọ́wọ́. But thank you very much for your support, and thanks for being here. Thanks for liking and sharing and all the great things you did to make the session successful. We'll be here again tomorrow at 1 p.m. Ife time, West African time. That's Agoko Fe. Losanla. We'll be here continuing the series on Akintola. I'm sure you're going to have a great time. But thank you very much for being here. So we're about to close. Any other thing? Does anybody have any other thing to say before we close? Before we act accordingly. Okay, I think we're good. Yeah, so again, if you're wondering why we're ending very early, it's because it's Tuesday. So Tuesdays and Thursdays we have short sessions or shorter sessions, but by tomorrow we're gonna have a full session that will be on camera. But thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon. We're gonna play our anthems before we go, like we usually do, to be the Nigerian anthem and also the Yoruba anthem. But for folks on YouTube and other platforms apart from TikTok, we're gonna have to let you go because of copyright issues. So somebody says, can you please answer the Orumila question? I answered the question already. You may have to listen to the recording. I answered the question already. And the short version of that question of the answer is that they lived in different timelines, different eras. So Orunmila came before. Again, we're talking about the physical. We're talking about history now, not the myth. When we get to the myth, that's another place, right? In the myth, you'll be talking about who came from heaven, how Orunmila got to the earth, how Oduduwa created the earth, all Batala did. That's the myth. But in history, when we're talking about dates, Oromila would be about 500 BC. And also understand that there's a process of beatification we have in Yoruba land, right? There's a process of beatification where it's similar to what you have in and I'm going from the known to the unknown. Not like it's the same thing, but it's similar to what you have in the Roman Catholic Church, where you beatify people who did great things and you start calling them saints. So it's similar to what we also have in Yoruba land. Just because they were beatified does not mean that they existed before time, right? Or they existed in eternity. They are dated. They were humans. People knew them. They knew people. They had children, and I'm sure you know. I didn't tell you why I said what I said, but I'm sure you got it because a lot of us are very smart people. So I'm sure you understand why I said what I said just now. Yeah. So yeah, it's a different era. If I was already in use before Dudua, but it did not spread as much as it did until after him because it was not codified in the way that it is now. Right? A lot of what you have with the structure of Ifa came much later. But one of these days, probably have a session to discuss that. All right. Thank you very much for being here. If you're on YouTube, we're going to let you go so that we don't have copyright issues on this anthems that we're about to play. So thank you very much for being here. See you tomorrow at 1 p.m. if you're at West African time. And do have a lovely afternoon and evening. God bless you. All right, for those of us on TikTok, we're going to have the anthems. We'll start with the Nigerian anthem and then the Yoruba anthem. If you know the songs, please sing along. If not, please learn the lyrics. It's important to learn lyrics. And tomorrow we'll even sing. We may have to. I'll see what we'll do tomorrow because I want us to listen to some Nigerian Kini independent songs. But we'll see how that goes. Anyway, let's have the